In our last video, we set up a Parasoft proxy to intercept the calls between our application and a backend system. Now what we want to do is we want to use that interception and capture the traffic from the application to the dependency and use that to create a virtual service. So to start the recording process, what we want to do is we want to head back to Virtualize perspective, which we can do by simply clicking in the upper right-hand corner on the Virtualize perspective button. And again, just like monitoring, we can select Start Recording here from the editor, or we can right click and choose the recording option. As soon as we select that, you will see that the icon changes with a little red light. And additionally, you'll see some information in your console indicating that you started recording and where your traffic file is going to go. Now that we're recording, we can simply exercise the application. I'm going to do some simple use cases, some positive, some negative, so we have a nice range of data in our virtual service. So I'm going to click on Request Loan, do a positive scenario, a $1,000 loan with a $10 down payment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and request another loan with $1 million as the loan and $1 down payment. This will trigger a decline and we will have that data. And just because I want to have a large range of loans, I'm going to also go ahead and apply for a loan with $2,222 and a $22 down payment. Usually at this point, what I would do is run a large portion of my UI tests, my regression tests, my API tests, anything I could to capture traffic. The more traffic I have, the better my virtual service will be. I think this is sufficient for now. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is come back into Virtualize, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I'm going to right click and say stop recording. I will then see in my console that all of those requests and responses, 6 messages, which means 3 requests and 3 responses were recorded. And the traffic file is called loan processor proxy.txt. So what I can do now is I can take that traffic and I can create my first virtual service from traffic. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my Virtual Asset Explorer, right click and say add new virtual asset. I'm going to name this the same name as the backend system that I'm simulating. Next, in this case, I'm simply going to choose traffic and store my data into my data storage mechanism. The data storage mechanism is the data repository. And now I'm going to choose that traffic file. So I'll browse here. I'll grab this traffic file, which is this one right here, loan processor proxy, and click next. Virtualize will do the majority of the heavy lifting here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and tell it to go ahead and store the loan data into my embedded data storage area, which is called a repository. And I'm going to simply call this loan processor data. Do a quick validation to make sure that it's online and not already existing. This is good. So I actually already have one called loan processor data. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to loan processor demo. Next. Virtualize has inferred some information from the traffic. In this case, it realizes it's XML and that the details for putting different requests together will be held in the request body. That is correct. And here are the results of that analysis, or the grouping. It said of all the 6 messages, 3 of them were paired together, and that the operation type was request loan, and that it's going to go ahead and auto-configure my services for it. I'm going to go ahead and let it do the auto-configure, but uncheck that just so we can see exactly what it's doing. Here's my request correlation section, and it basically is saying that it's going to look at any time I did down payment and loan amount. It's also going to look at my available funds. Since I didn't actually modify my available funds, I'm going to go ahead and remove that from the decision-making criteria. We'll talk more about this in a subsequent video. Finally, I'm going to feed the actual Parabank WSDL for loan processor to my virtual service. Having the service definition will always make your virtual services that much better because it will have all of the schema information. So I'll go ahead and say finish, and it's going to go through the traffic file and create a virtual service for me. Here's my virtual service. My virtual service has its response, and the response right now is getting its data from this data source, request loan. So what we can do is quickly take a look at the data source, request loan, by opening the table, and we see pretty much all of the same information that we entered when we did our request. If this, then this is the response. All right, let's go ahead and change something about our request, and then we will exercise our virtual service. So let's say for the $1,000 request, I'm simply going to change the provider to say Virtualize Loans. Now, what we need to do is we need to redirect our incoming requests towards our virtual service. So to do that, we need to do two things. We need to know what the endpoint is of our virtual service, and we need to redirect the proxy to point at the virtual service. And all of that can be accomplished here in the server view. So let's go ahead and open our virtual assets, and here we see our first virtual asset, the loan processor. So let's go ahead and double click this and take a look at its endpoint. So from the traffic, it read the proxy because that's where we recorded it from. So what we should do here is we should change our path to say virtual, because we don't want our proxy and our virtual asset to have the same endpoint. And then what we need to do is feed this back to our proxy. So let's go ahead and grab this endpoint, copy, don't forget to save, and let's go into our proxy, double click, open up the proxy, and say, okay, now, instead of going to the real service, which is what we have been doing to record traffic, let's go to the virtual service. There's no need to change our target application. We know that that's going to continue to go to the proxy. At this point, when we say OK and save, we will now be redirecting our application through the proxy to point at the virtual service. The final step we need to do is to enable our virtual service, and we're good to go. So now what's happening is the application is connecting through the proxy to the virtual service. We can come into our application and test our connection. So let's go ahead and apply for a loan again, $1,000 and $10, because that's the one that we changed the language on. And now when we click this apply button, we will get a response from our virtual service instead of the real service.